I'd like to welcome the eminent historian, Professor of History at Tufts University, Professor Ayesha Jalal, to make her keynote address at the 13th edition of the Lahore Literary Festival. It is an honor for me to introduce Professor Ayesha Jalal. Her contributions to South Asian history and thought are truly exceptional. Awarded the MacArthur Genius Fellowship in 1998, Professor Jalal has authored many books, including Self and Sovereignty, Partisans of Allah, and today's keynote address is inspired by her latest work, Muslim Enlightened Thought in South Asia. Please join me to welcome the one and only Professor Ayesha Jalal.
Thank you. I would like to begin. It's a great honor for me to have my new book formally launched in my hometown, and I'd like to thank the LLF organizers and especially Razi Ahmed for making this possible. In an extended conversation with the Italian diplomat Pietro Quaroni here in the historic city of Lahore in 1936, Allama Muhammad Iqbal set out the conditions for a meaningful dialogue between the transmitters of so-called Western and Eastern knowledge, which are worth quoting given their relevance in our times when these artificial constructs are being conjured up with renewed vigor. If you want to be friends or protectors of Islam, if you want us to trust you, then you must begin by demonstrating that you think our religion is as good as yours. We too know and appreciate logic, the same logic as you, the Aristotelian logic. Don't forget that. Well-versed in Islamic philosophy and mysticism, Iqbal did not just engage with European thought, he made important contributions to concepts of space and time, seeing himself as a link in a long chain of productive knowledge exchanges between Europeans and Asians. He has left a trail of active and lively engagement with intersecting networks of people and institutions in Italy, Germany, Britain, France, and Spain. My book, Muslim Enlightened Thought in South Asia, investigates enlightened thinking among Muslims under British colonial rule during the late 19th and early 20th centuries and its aftermath. I follow the arc of Roshan Khayali, literally enlightened thinking, illuminating an attitude of mind displayed by multiple generations of Muslim enlightened thinkers from the mid-19th century onwards. In a sense, Roshan Khayali is my book's primary protagonist, challenging the view portraying Muslim thinkers as exemplars of an apologetic modernity. I highlight a strand of Muslim thought and a certain liberality of mind that has been ignored by those obsessed with dire and dour theologians. I challenge both the presumptions of historians of liberalism that exclude Muslims from the domain of modern liberal thought and the predilection of scholars of Islam that lean towards discovering theological rigidity among ulama rather than the enlightened liberality of certain ulama, of course, as well, but certainly Muslim poets, philosophers, educationists, novelists, historians, artists, and public intellectuals. My interpretation of Muslim thought unfolds in three movements. First, I investigate the epistemic rupture that came with the formal loss of sovereignty in 1857, specifically foregrounding the change in the meaning of religion following the altered nature of the ruler-subject relationship, with special reference to matters of personal faith. I start by turning the spotlight to the great poet, the Persian and Urdu poet Mirza Sadullah Khan Ghalib, to tease out the enlightened thinking of a towering figure deemed to be located on the dangerous border between Muslimness and infidelity. The preeminent social reformer and educationist Sayyid Ahmad Khan, may be the most overexposed of Muslim thinkers, but Sayyid Ahmad merits a fresh assessment to underline his role as the leading expositor of Roshan Khayali, or enlightened thinking. Among Sayyid Ahmad's close associates that I consider are Maulvi Zakaullah of Delhi, an exploration of the friendship and scholarship of Muhammad Zakaullah, Nazir Ahmad, and their Christian interlocutor, C.F. Andrews, reveals the fluid depths of religion as faith rather than a rigid identity encapsulated by colonial categories. The pursuit of independent-minded thinking in late 19th century India was carried out with special vigor by Muslims in the domain of history writing to counter colonial depictions of Islam as a backward-looking, despotic religion. Part 2 of the book turns to examining some of these endeavors, highlighting the role of history in efforts to relocate the displaced Muslim self in colonial India and the broader Islamic world. I examine the historical works of Sayyid Ahmad Khan, Sayyid Amir Ali, Maulvi Zakaullah, and last but not least, Muhammad Hussain Azad's 850-page tomb, Darbar-e Akbari, a dynastic history of the Mughal Emperor Akbar, who spent the years 1586 to 1598 in this luminous city. Darbar-e Akbari's simple, uplifting, and epic narrative is reminiscent of qissas, stories, and dastan-goi, storytelling. The passion and delight animating Azad's prose is not for Akbar's person so much as for his open, balanced, and broad-minded thinking, sense of fairness, and non-discriminatory attitude towards members of different religious communities. In Azad's view, Akbar was the first Indian ruler to grant complete freedom of thought and religious practice to the subcontinent's diverse people. Another work, also inspired by Sayyid Ahmad Khan, was Altaf Hussein's Hali's Musaddas, an extended poem designed to light the candle of Islam in India. In his essay, Tadbir, Hali derisively asked those who today excel in liberty when they started to become liberal. Hali portrays the Prophet as a liberal and moderate individual with a keen sense of fairness. Maulana Shibli Nomani's major historical works, especially the book on the 9th century Abbasid Caliph Al-Mamun, was undertaken with the explicit intention of illuminating the compatibility of reason and revelation in Islam. Yet another Urdu essayist and popular novelist, Abdul Halim Sharar, elaborates on Muslim objections to excessive reason in a lecture on the rise and fall of the Mu'tazila, the archetypical rationalists in Islamic history. Sharar raised the question of women's agency in his novel Meena Bazar, set in the Mughal era of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal. In another chapter, I explore in some depth the case of the Mughal princess Zebul Nisa, the eldest daughter of Aurangzeb, and ways in which she was remembered in the early 20th century. A talented poet, she crossed many lines that her orthodox father prohibited, such as the ban on women in the royal quarters reading the Divan of Hafiz Shirazi. When asked why he had granted her the privilege, Aurangzeb explained that the women of the harem read the verses literally, unlike the princes who had the intellectual ability to read them metaphorically and for aesthetic purposes. Using an array of sources, including poetry, philosophy, painting, and literature, the third and final movement of my book turns to the enlightened ideas that motivated Muslims to resist colonial rule and launch a struggle for the achievement of their rights in independent India and Pakistan. For my interpretation of the Roshan Khayali of these leading intellectual figures in post-independence Pakistan, such as Ghulam Abbas, Dr. Fazlur Rahman, Dawood Rehbar, Ghulam Ahmed Parvez, Khalifa Abdul Hakim, Sibte Hassan, and of course the redoubtable Asma Jahangir. You will have to read the book. In the remainder of my keynote lecture, I will focus on two 20th century Roshan Khayal intellectuals and artists who lived at some stage or the other in this wonderful city of Lahore, and whose enlightened thought and art holds lessons for challenges that we are facing today. The self-styled herald of Muslim self-awakening in the subcontinent, the poet-philosopher Muhammad Iqbal, embraced the prophetic tradition, "Do not revive time, for time is God," a metaphor that accompanied him throughout his life. How did this influence his thinking on time and history? The Prophet's command was divine to stop Arabs from cursing time when faced with disasters. God, not time, was the cause of disasters. To curse time was to curse God, who alternated night and day without being bound by time. For Iqbal, the real purpose of life for Muslims, true in faith, was to align their individual self to the divine will, to have a time with God, and thereby partake in the process of creation, continuous creation. Among Iqbal's private papers discovered after his death was a notebook which he started in April 1910, containing his impression of various books and ideas he was examining. He himself gave the title "Stray Reflections" to this notebook, a treasure trove of rare and succinct insights into his thinking on a wide range of issues. Reading his reflections and thoughts during his years as a student alongside his letters and published lectures and poetry reveals a complex but poignant understanding of time, not as the objective reality of serial time, but as a distinctly psychological experience. He remarked that the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, whom he greatly otherwise admired, thought belief in God made people feeble. The wisdom of Islam, in Iqbal's opinion, consists in exploiting the idea of God in the interest of man and transforming him into a source of power, for the Tawheed, or unity of creation of Islam, means absolute freedom from fear and superstition in actual life. Iqbal distinguished clock or serial time, waqt or zaman, which being mechanical was incapable of capturing the psychological dimensions of perceiving God's time, translated as dahr or pure duration. Iqbal rejected the Newtonian notion of time as absolute. And while approving of his theory of relativity, Iqbal was also dissatisfied with Albert Einstein's notion of time as a fourth dimension of space, which in his view regards the future that is already fixed. Time as a free creative movement has no meaning for Einstein's theory, Iqbal noted. Time does not pass, events do not happen, we simply meet them. He was also dismissive of Nietzsche's circular conception of time. His criticism of Nietzsche's eternal recurrence was that instead of being eternal creation, it was eternal repetition, which he found intellectually stultifying and contrary to the spirit of Islam, as continuous creation. Iqbal's notion of time, this continuous creative movement, was drawn primarily from the Quran and various Muslim thinkers such as the 13th and 15th century Persian philosophers Fakhruddin Iraqi and Mullah Jamaluddin Dawani, respectively. But there was also elements of Henry Bergson's notion of time as continuous change or durée that accorded well with Iqbal's idea of time as pure duration in contradiction to everyday serial time or mechanical time. Like Bergson, Iqbal believed that the two types of time needed different types of self. Serial or worldly time required the efficient self, capable of apprehending reality in multiple parts, while time as pure duration could only be experienced by an appreciative self, capable of apprehending reality holistically. In 1931, while touring European cities, Iqbal visited Paris, where he met the ailing French philosopher. He surprised Bergson by quoting the Prophet on dahr, a term he defined as a designation for an overwhelming reality of which time and space are only aspects. In 1933, Iqbal asked If Deher is continuous and extended and is Allah himself, what then is space? Just as time is a kind of reflection of Deher, so space must also be a reflection of Deher, or pure duration. In Iqbal's Tawheed-centered philosophy, time psychologically precedes space and serves as its intellectual source. The idea of time as pure duration had direct implications for Iqbal's understanding of history and shaped his attitudes towards some of the more vexed questions in Muslim thought, like the issue of human freedom and God's foreknowledge. Praising Ibn Khaldun's idea of history as a genuinely creative movement and not a movement whose path is already determined, Iqbal described the 14th century Arab Muslim historian as a forerunner of Bergson. In combination with his idea of Insanul Kamal, the perfect individual, Iqbal's understanding of history as continuous creative movement through serial time is dynamic and forever open to fresh permutations and combinations. A poet and philosopher, rather than a historian, Iqbal did not have to test his understanding or philosophical understanding of human history with the demands of writing history. He toyed with the idea of writing a history of Muslim thought, which was unfortunately so little known in Europe. I wish I had time to write an extensive book on the subject, he told Reynolds A. Nicholson, to show to the Western student of philosophy how philosophic ideas and philosophic thinking makes the whole world akin. Far from being the proverbial apologetic Muslim, Iqbal thought it a great loss that the progress of Islam as a conquering faith stultified the growth of those germs of an economic and democratization organization of society that was scattered up and down the pages of the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet. Islam, in his opinion, had so far proved itself a more successful opponent of the race idea, which is probably, he argued, the hardest barrier in the way of the humanitarian ideal. Iqbal thought Ernest Renan was wrong in believing that science was the greatest enemy of Islam. No, it is the race idea which is the greatest enemy of Islam, in fact, of all humanity. He insisted, and it is the duty of all lovers of mankind to stand in revolt against this dreadful invention of the devil. The purpose of his Persian classic, Asrar-e-Khudi, was not to promote Islam so much as to discover a universal social reconstruction that did away with distinctions of caste, rank, and race, while keeping a balance between worldly and otherworldly affairs. This was what Europe lacks, and this is what she can still learn from us, he argued. Iqbal's efforts to educate Europeans on Islam's de-racialized conception of human life never materialized in his philosophical writings. He achieved a great deal more through the medium of his poetry, which he used to explicate some of his philosophical ideas than any historical work he might have contemplated writing. Iqbal's ideas on space and time are interspersed in his reconstruction of Islam lectures, occasional letters, and poetic anthologies, especially the first and last of his celebrated collection of Persian poetry, Asrar-e-Khudi and the Javed-Nama. In Asrar-e-Khudi, that was published in 1915, Iqbal provides a glimpse, or rather glimpses, of his mature thinking on the nexus between time and space, likening the time to a sword that cuts through the morass of human limitations. He castigates all those enthralled by yesterday and tomorrow. They had imagined time as a line, which he calls the girdle of infidelity. Art thou a Muslim? Then cast off this girdle. Be a candle to the feast of the religion of the free. Knowing not the origin of time, thou art ignorant of everlasting life. How long wilt thou be in thrall of night and day? Learn the mystery of time from the words, I have a time with God. The individual who has absorbed God, not annihilated the self in the divine, lives in pure duration, which is to be at the center of destiny. By participating in God's time as his servant, a human being is no longer merely an instrument of serial time, but a mover and shaker in processes of divine creation. The overlapping search for self and God animates Iqbal's poetry and explains his attraction to the great 13th century Muslim mystic Jalaluddin Rumi, whom he adopted as his lifelong spiritual guide. Iqbal's God-centeredness was once questioned by the principal of Lahore's former Christian college, Dr. Edward D. Lucas, who asked him if he really believed that the Quranic verses were revealed to the Prophet. Exactly as they are. Were they identically revealed to him? When Iqbal replied in the affirmative, the principal was surprised that an educated and cultural man like him held such a belief. Iqbal's reply encapsulates his critique of the excesses of reason and preference for the intuitive. With me, it is not a question of belief, but a matter of personal experience, he told Lucas. I can tell you that when I write poetry, a verse is revealed to me complete with the words. Why then could not, Iqbal asked, the language of the Quran have been revealed to the Prophet? If Israr Khudi was meant for the select few, Iqbal expected his last and weightiest work, the Javed-Nama, published in 1932, to reach a broad audience. Also composed in Persian, the extended poem used the powerful trope of the Prophet's ascension to the heavens, Miraj, as his organizational framework, leading some critics to characterize the work as an imitation of Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy. Despite temporal and spatial specificities, there are similarities between the two works. However, the Spanish scholar of Islam, Miguel Asim Palacios, in his 1990 book, Islam and the Divine Comedy, established that it was in fact Dante who borrowed the idea of the Miraj from Muslim literature without attribution. After initial furious opposition to Palacios' work, Dante scholars who objected to the doubts cast on the originality of the Divine Comedy have come around to accepting the cross-fertilization of ideas that led to its composition. Where Dante chose Virgil as his guide, Iqbal's preferred spiritual companion is Rumi, who guides him through heavenly space in Javed-Nama. Widely considered to be his magnum opus, Iqbal in Javed-Nama replaces intellect with intuition to imaginatively navigate the skies in an unprecedented spiritual voyage modeled on the Prophet's ascension. Such a book has never been written in any Islamic language, Iqbal declared, delighting in the fact that it was in the rhyme of Maulana Rumi's Masnavi. More of a literary event than another poetic anthology, Javed-Nama was still in press when Iqbal provided a purview of it in 1931. The occasion was an afternoon reception of the Literary Association in London, attended by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the Aga Khan, and several English luminaries. The Javed-Nama opens with a supplication, Iqbal told the audience, with a poet who assumes the nom de plume Zinda Rab, literally a living stream, standing on a seashore in the evening, reading some verses from Rumi, which makes Rumi's spirit appear. The poet asks a barrage of questions from Rumi's spirit, principal among which is how the soul of man passes beyond space and time. As he elucidated, the idea was to expound the philosophy of the Prophet's mirage and encounter with the divine creator. The poet is then charmed by the spirit of space-time, which he imagines as a double-faced angel whose visages are dark and sleeping rather than dark, bright and awake. Lifted into a higher realm by the spirit of space-time, the two, that is Iqbal and Rumi, wade through space until the mountains of the moon become visible. Here they hear a song from the stars, Iqbal continues, a sort of welcome given to human beings who have the courage to pass beyond space. Once on the moon, Rumi and the poet enter some caves and find the great Indian ascetic Vishwamitra, whose name is translated as Jahan Dost, or world friend. Absorbed in deep contemplation with a white snake circling his head, the ascetic asks Rumi, whom he recognizes immediately who the newcomer is. After Rumi's brief description, Vishwamitra tests Iqbal's spiritual accomplishments, and is satisfied enough to make a series of disclosures that are narrated in the Javed-Nama. They next pass into the valley of the moon, where they find a huge rock on which 4 pictures are carved, the tablets of Buddha, Jesus, Zoroaster, and the Prophet Muhammad, each of which is explained. The poet and Rumi then journey from planet to planet. On Mars, they encounter a woman prophet, originally stolen from Europe as a child by the devil, and who teaches the women of Mars a new evolution, which according to this woman prophet, tends to eliminate the male. Her message is that the world will, Iqbal told his mystified audiences, eventually be ruled by women. She advises the women not to marry, and if they marry and have children, to kill the male and retain the female children. This provides the occasion for Rumi's withering critique of modern civilization on account of its irreligiosity. In their quest for continuously new manifestations, the duo move on to the planet Mercury, where they encounter the spirits of Jalaluddin al-Afghani and the Ottoman reformist Sayyid Halim Pasha. Afghani sends a message to the Russians, comparing the spirit of Islam with the spirit of Bolshevism, while Karl Marx is described as a prophet without an angel. They next reach Jupiter, where they meet the great Islamic martyr, Mansur al-Hallaj, the prominent Iranian woman scholar of the Babi sect, Qurratullain Tahira, and Asadullah Khan Ghalib. All 3 had refused a place in paradise, deeming it to be too restrictive for their free, creative spirits. By contrast, on another planet, 2 spirits are seeking a board in hell, but have been refused admittance, the traitors Mir Jafar of Bengal and Mir Sadiq of Mysore. On another planet below a triumphant sea, the spirit of Pharaoh and Kitchener are shown in conversation, drawing the attention of the Mahdi of Sudan from paradise, who addresses the Arabic-speaking world. After traversing the planets, the 2 reach paradise, where they meet saints and kings. They find the palace of Sharful Nisa, the daughter of Abdus Samad Khan, the governor of Lahore, the city where she is buried, in a tomb decorated with a cypress tree. They also meet the patron saint of Kashmir, Shah Hamdan, who raises question about the history and people of the region, King Nader Shah of Persia, Ahmad Shah Abdali of Afghanistan, and Tipu Sultan. As they prepare to leave paradise, Iqbal explains the real meaning of the concept of Islam. Not an end, paradise is a stage in the spiritual development of human beings, whose potential is unlimited, the more so when it is accompanied by self-knowledge and a sense of divine presence. The denizens of heaven urge Iqbal not to leave them, but after some time agree to settle for one of his songs instead. Rumi leaves Zinda Rawat at this point, since the final stage of being in the divine presence, akin to a new birth, can only be experienced alone. The poet asks God a series of serious questions and demands full revelation of the destiny of his people, a wish that is granted to him. Javed-Nama ends with a song from the spirit of the universe, with the poet addressing the coming generation through his son Javed. Iqbal's medley of historic characters in Javed-Nama illustrates his broad-mindedness towards other religious traditions, an ability for comparative religious understanding, and belief in the possibility of their intrinsic compatibility with Islam. Even if he erred somewhat in grasping the historic significance of men like Nader Shah and Abdali, whom he hailed as Islamic heroes, Iqbal managed to compose an extraordinarily powerful poem that was aimed at inspiring future generations. If he can be forgiven for taking poetic license with history, the dynamic conception of time was meant to be an overture to Muslims to strive to embrace God's time by comprehending the needs of the hour and becoming co-partners in the process of continuously new creation. Hopeful and purposeful, Iqbal's conception of human destiny, with its limitless possibilities, is diametrically opposed to ideas of territorialized and exclusionary national identities that were being planted in the hearts and minds of subjugated nations in response to a triumphant Europe. While the ultimate direction of his human endeavor to partake of God's time had to be determined, it was the spirit that the poet of the East gave expression to, and which remained at the center of his lifelong philosophy. It took the artistic genius of Sayyid Sadiqian Ahmed Naqvi, better known as Sadiqian, to visually immortalize Iqbal's expansive thought on time and space. The final two sections of Sadiqian's giant mural, The Treasures of Time, depict a clean-shaven but mustached Iqbal, the Mufakkar-e-Pakistan, thinker of Pakistan. He's seated in the company of several famous like-minded individuals, giving visual expression to Iqbal's verse. Gaye din ke tanha mein chaman, yahan ab mere rasta aur bhi hain. Gone are the days when I was alone in company. Here there are many confidants of mine now. Resting his head on the right hand, the poet and philosopher is deep in thought, reading the book he is holding in the left hand over his knees. On the tip of a mountain in the background is an eagle. Sitting on a rock, as a black-flanked falcon descends from the sky, adorned with minarets. Standing behind Iqbal on the right is Rabindranath Tagore, with his easily recognizable broad forehead and flowing white beard. Sitting on a low seat in front of the Bengali polymath is the matchless Ghalib in Mughal attire, composing poetry on a white sheet of paper in the light of a candle in a holder that is resting on a table, with a curled smoking pipe on his left. Standing on Iqbal's left is the profile of a grey-haired Albert Einstein, bearing a slight smile and holding a pipe in his right hand. The German physicist's left hand is a clock. In his left hand, he's holding a clock that has stars instead of numerals, with distorted hour and minute hands, gesturing at his theory of relativity and Iqbal's critique of the conventional conception of time. The stars and crescent moon allude to nighttime, while the cityscape and the bomb symbolizes the human destruction wreaked by science and international politics in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Altogether, The Treasures of Time depicts 45 famous artists, astronomers, mathematicians, philosophers, physicians, poets, scientists, and writers, all male. The failure of any woman to qualify for inclusion in a celebration of human intellectual development is unsettling. But it is more aptly a comment on dominant attitudes the world over, to say nothing of the society in which the mural was painted, rather than indicative of the artist's conceptual limitations. The mural Sadiqian painted in 1973 on the ceiling of the entrance hall of the LAHORE Museum was inspired by Iqbal's vision of humankind's journey to self-realization. It foregrounds Iqbal's verse, Sadaron se aage jahan aur bhi hain, abhi ishq ke bahan aur bhi hain. There are yet other worlds beyond the stars. There are yet other tests of love to come. An allusion to the idea of an expanding universe in which one must seek to realize destiny by participating in the work of divine creation, the mural entitled Evolution of Mankind, Tazkir-e-Kainat, is a rumination on the idea of Tazkir-e-Kainat, literally coming to grips with the universe. Sadiqian's visual narrative begins with Adam's progeny, represented in the form of giant, elongated cacti-like fingers groping and scraping in the darkness of a well in an unknown universe. And while after a while the power of the intellect and the human instinct for discovery leads to the invention of instruments and tools to explore the universe. A calligraphist by family tradition, Sadiqian made skillful uses of the script, making them appear like human forms in discs spinning in their orbits. Against the backdrop of different shades of blue, signifying an ever-expanding universe, are brightly colored spiraling discs laced with working tools to symbolize The line from Iqbal's verse, there are yet other stars beyond the world beyond the stars, appears 2/3 of the way from the beginning of the mural, in a reference to Iqbal's conception of time without its philosophical complexities. Sadiqian painted a clock with Urdu numerals moving in a counterclockwise direction to reflect the right and left movement of the Arabic and Persian, not to say the Urdu scripts, and also to represent the concept of Zaman wa Makan, time and space together in one place. An hourglass reflects the constantly changing nature of time. The narrative of the mural ends with several giant hands, symbolic of hard labor, rising out of the unknown, catching flying balls like cricket players, to use Sadiq Khan's own words, which is also the cover of the book, of my book. On closer look, the balls are globes with maps of continents that giant human hands are about to catch. In the middle of this section of the mural, two hands are showing holding two prominent tools shaped with the letters Aleph with a diacritical and Jim, making for the word Aj, today. In the backdrop is a red earth and a very large sun, decorated with Arabic alphabets like Jim, Dal, Re, Sin, that are emitting the light of knowledge. The consecration of both labor and knowledge echoes Iqbal's message, exhorting human beings to strive and become part of the process of divine creation. In Sadiq Khan's visual transcreation, human beings are shown not just playing, but actually winning the game of the Skele Kainat by fulfilling their divinely given potential, a prerequisite if they are to escape punishment on the day of judgment. Expansive and enlightening, these are worthy ideas to keep in mind, especially for the younger generation, I argue in my book, to promote and strengthen transnational intellectual networks that are neither exclusively of the East nor of the West, in the common human objective of coming to grips with a changing and challenging world in an expanding and extremely uncertain universe. Towards the end of the book, I bring in the other great poet of this country, Habib Jalal, and contrast him somewhat with Iqbal. But unlike the philosophical thrust of Iqbal's enlightening message of renewal through creative endeavor, Jalal's condemnation of the dust-laden freedom that came with the end of colonial rule was more oriented towards bread and butter issues, facing the subordinated social classes. The light in Iqbal needs to be rescued from appropriation by officialdom in conjunction with certain elements who have restricted its message to an abstract glorification of Islam without the emphasis on inner struggle for self-realization and collective well-being. Jalal's poetry, by contrast, has remained a red rag for the state, earning him extended spells in jail, but also a permanent place in the hearts and minds of the toiling millions on both sides of the historic divide of 1947. The differences between these two great poets and their divergent perceptions and interpretations underline the myriad ways in which enlightened thinking helps keep alive faith in the power of Nur al-Nur, light upon light, even in the darkest of times. Generations of Roshan Khayal thinkers I show in this book have left a legacy of 1,000 candles to light up the night. Thank you very much.